The laughter hit him like buckshot. It started with a snicker from the back of the church. Just one man couldn't hold it in. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the whole congregation was roaring, slapping their knees, wiping tears from their eyes like they just heard the funniest joke ever told west of the Mississippi. And there he stood, Elijah Crane, 34 years old, weathered face, calloused hands, a man who'd survived droughts, wolves, and winters cold enough to freeze whiskey solid in the bottle. A man who'd buried both parents before he turned 20 and built a homestead from nothing but sweat and stubbornness. He stood at the front of that church, hat in hand, and asked the simplest question a man could ask. "I'm looking for a wife." And they laughed. "Before we begin, tell me where you watching from today. Drop it in the comments. Sending love your way." Now, here's what those laughing folks didn't know. They didn't know that Elijah Crane had a secret buried so deep in his past that it had shaped every decision he'd ever made. They didn't know why he'd waited this long. They didn't know what he was really asking for, or what he was willing to give in return. And they certainly didn't know about the woman sitting in the third pew, the one who wasn't laughing, the one who was about to ask a single question that would turn every smile in that church into stone-cold silence. Her name was Miriam Yates, and she was about to change everything. The town of Hollow Ridge sat in a valley between two dust-colored mountains, forgotten by progress and ignored by the railroad. It had a general store, a saloon, a church, and exactly 237 residents, most of whom had been born there and planned to die there, preferably without anything interesting happening in between. Elijah Crane lived 11 miles east of town, on a homestead so remote that even the mail carrier only came twice a month. His nearest neighbor was a 3-hour ride away. His daily companions were a gray horse named Molly, 17 head of cattle, and silence so thick you could choke on it. He hadn't always been alone. Once, when he was young and foolish and believed that life rewarded the righteous, he'd been engaged. Her name was Catherine Bell, preacher's daughter. Soft voice, softer hands. She'd promised to marry him the summer he turned 22. She died 3 weeks before the wedding. Fever took her, came on fast, burned hot, and left nothing but a wooden cross on a hill overlooking her father's church. Elijah had carved that cross himself, spent 4 days on it, didn't eat, didn't sleep, just carved until his hands bled and the wood was smooth as river stone. After that, something in him closed. He stopped going to town, stopped talking to people, built his homestead farther and farther from the world, like he was trying to outrun something that couldn't be outrun. Years passed. His hair grew gray at the temples. His face grew hard. And the people of Hollow Ridge forgot he existed until they needed something. A cow that wandered too far. A fence that bordered his land. A question about property lines. Then they'd ride out, conduct their business, and leave as quickly as possible, because Elijah Crane made people uncomfortable. He looked at you too long, spoke too little, and there was something in his eyes, something unfinished, that made even grown men uneasy. So when he walked into church that Sunday morning, people noticed. He never came to church. He sat in the back pew, alone, wearing his cleanest shirt, which wasn't very clean, and his only coat, which had patches on the elbows. He held his hat in his lap with both hands. Like a man holding a prayer he wasn't sure anyone would answer. The service was the same as always. Hymns, scripture, a sermon about patience and providence that seemed to go on forever. Elijah sat through all of it without moving, without singing, without doing anything except staring at the back of the pew in front of him. Then came the announcements. Pastor Hollis stood at the pulpit, reading from a piece of paper. Jenkins' family is selling their plow. Mrs. Beaumont is looking for help with her garden. Anderson's mare had twin foals, both healthy. He paused, peered over his spectacles. Anyone else have something to share with the congregation? Silence. Then a creak. The creak of a pew as Elijah Crane stood up. Every head in that church turned. 237 residents, and at least 100 of them were in that building, and every single one of them was staring at the man who never came to town, standing in the back row like he'd wandered in from another world. I'm looking for a wife. His voice was rough and used, like a door that hadn't been opened in years, the hinges rusty with neglect. I've got land, good land, a house, cattle. I can provide. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I'm asking if any woman here would consider marrying me. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then it shattered. The laughter started with Harold Benson, the town drunk, who never took anything seriously. But it spread like wildfire through dry grass, jumping from pew to pew until the whole church was filled with the sound of ridicule. Elijah Crane wants a wife, someone shouted. Better check if he's still alive first. Thought he was a ghost. What woman would want to live way out there? You'd have to be crazy. The comments flew thick and fast, accompanied by howls of laughter. Women covered their mouths, trying to be polite but failing. Men slapped each other's backs like they'd just witnessed the greatest joke of their lives. And Elijah stood there. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there with his hat in his hands, his face a mask of stone, while the town that had forgotten him remembered him just long enough to humiliate him. Pastor Hollis tried to restore order. Now, let's settle down. But no one listened. The laughter continued, rolling through the wooden pews like thunder through a canyon. It bounced off the walls, filled every corner, pressed against Elijah's chest like a physical weight, and still he didn't move, because he'd expected this. Deep down, in the part of himself he rarely visited, he'd known this would happen. Known they would laugh. Known they would mock him. He'd prepared himself for it, built walls around his heart thick enough to withstand anything. Or so he thought. What he hadn't prepared for was the way his hands started shaking, the way his throat closed up, the way the laughter seemed to drill into his skull, finding every insecurity he'd ever hidden, every wound he'd never healed. He thought of Catherine. He thought of her grave on that hill, untended for too many years. He thought of all the nights he'd spent alone in that empty house, talking to no one, waiting for nothing, growing old in silence. And for the first time in over a decade, Elijah Crane wanted to cry. He didn't. Instead, he turned toward the door. He was going to leave, going to walk out of that church, ride home, and never show his face in Hollow Ridge again. He was going to accept what the laughter meant, that he was a joke, a footnote, a man not worth taking seriously. He was going to disappear. But then he heard it. A voice. A single voice, cutting through the laughter like a knife through silk. I have a question. The laughter didn't stop immediately, but it faltered, hesitated. A few people turned to see who had spoken, and then a few more, and then the laughter began to die, replaced by a curious murmur. Elijah stopped. He turned, and he saw her. She sat in the third pew from the front on the left side. A woman in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, hard to tell. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so serious, and eyes that seemed to look right through everything they saw. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't even smiling. She was staring directly at Elijah, and there was something in her expression that he couldn't quite read. Interest, curiosity, challenge? I have a question, she repeated, and this time the church fell completely silent. Pastor Hollis cleared his throat. Miss Yates, perhaps this isn't. It's a simple question, Pastor. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with practiced hands. For Mr. Crane. Every eye in the church moved between them, the strange, solitary rancher and the woman nobody quite understood, because Miriam Yates was almost as much of an outsider as Elijah was. She'd arrived in Hollow Ridge 3 years ago, alone, and had never explained where she came from or why. She worked as a seamstress, lived in a small room above the general store, kept to herself. Some people said she was running from something. Others said she was waiting for something. Nobody knew which. Now she stood in that church, facing Elijah Crane, and asked the question that would change both their lives. Why? That was all she said. Just one word. Why? The silence in that church was absolute. Not the comfortable silence of contentment, but the tense, breathless silence of anticipation. Every person in that building was leaning forward, waiting to hear what Elijah Crane would say to this strange woman with her strange question. Such a simple word. Such an impossible question. Why was he looking for a wife? Why now, after all these years? Why had he walked into this church, knowing they would mock him, and asked anyway? Elijah looked at Miriam Yates. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes fixed on his face. There was no judgment in her expression, no mockery, just patient, unflinching curiosity. She actually wanted to know, and something in Elijah cracked. Not broke, not shattered, just cracked. A tiny fissure in the wall he'd built around himself, letting in light he hadn't felt in years. "Because I'm dying." The words came out before he could stop them. A gasp rippled through the congregation. Even Pastor Hollis looked stunned. But Miriam didn't react at all. She just stood there, waiting, like she'd known he wasn't finished. "Not today," Elijah continued, his voice rough. "Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Doc Morrison says I've got a year. Maybe 2 if I'm lucky." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've never been lucky." He took a breath. "I've spent my whole life alone. Told myself I didn't need anyone. Told myself I was better off that way. But now," he swallowed hard, "now I'm staring down the end, and I realize I've been lying to myself. I don't want to die alone. I don't want to be buried on that hill with nobody to remember I existed." His hands were shaking again. He couldn't stop them. "I'm not asking for love. I know that's too much to ask. I'm asking for company. For someone to talk to at the end of the day. For someone who'll remember my name after I'm gone." He looked around the church at all the faces that had been laughing moments ago. "That's all I wanted. That's why I asked." The silence stretched. No one knew what to say. The laughter had died completely, replaced by an awkward discomfort that hung in the air like smoke. People avoided Elijah's eyes, stared at their hands, shifted in their seats. They were ashamed. But Miriam Yates wasn't finished. "What killed you?" she asked. Elijah blinked. "What? You said you're dying. What's killing you?" "I don't." He stopped, thought about it. "Doc says it's my lungs. Something growing inside them. He's seen it before." Miriam nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she asked another question, and this one was even stranger. "What was her name?" Elijah felt the blood drain from his face. "I don't know what the woman you lost." Miriam's voice was gentle now, but still firm. "The one who made you close yourself off from the world. The one you've been grieving for all these years." She tilted her head slightly. "What was her name? How did she know? How could she possibly know?" Elijah stared at her, his heart pounding, and realized that this woman, this stranger, saw him more clearly than anyone had in years. Saw past the walls, past the silence, past all the defenses he'd built. "Catherine," he whispered. "Her name was Catherine." Miriam nodded again. Then she turned to face the congregation. "You all laughed at this man," she said, and her voice rang through the church like a bell. "You laughed at a dying man who came here to ask for help, who came here to ask for human kindness. And you laughed at him." She paused, letting the words sink in. "What does that say about you? What does that say about this town?" No one answered. "I've been in Hollow Ridge for 3 years," Miriam continued. 3 years, and not one of you has ever asked where I came from. Not one of you has ever asked what I'm running from. You've been too busy with your gossip, your judgment, your comfortable little lives." Her eyes swept the room. "Well, I'm done waiting for you to be better. I'm done waiting for kindness that never comes." She turned back to Elijah. "I'll do it." The words hung in the air. "I'll marry you, Mr. Crane." 3 days later, they were married. The ceremony was brief, perfunctory, witnessed only by Pastor Hollis and his wife. No flowers, no music, no guests beyond those required by law. Miriam wore her best dress, a faded blue thing she'd sewn herself, and Elijah wore the same coat he'd worn to church. When Pastor Hollis pronounced them man and wife, neither of them smiled. This wasn't a love story. Not yet. They rode out to Elijah's homestead in his wagon, the 11 miles stretching out before them like a sentence yet to be completed. The land grew wilder as they went, the last signs of civilization falling away behind them until there was nothing but endless plains, distant mountains, and sky so big it seemed to swallow everything beneath it. They didn't speak for the first hour. Miriam sat beside Elijah on the wagon bench, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't brought much: one trunk, one bag, and the clothes on her back. Everything she owned in the world, contained in 2 pieces of luggage. What was she running from? Elijah wondered. What secret was buried in that trunk? But he didn't ask. Instead, he focused on the road, on the rhythm of Molly's hooves against the packed earth, on the sun climbing toward noon. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Exactly. It was more like the silence between 2 strangers on a train, the acknowledgement that they were sharing space without obligation to share anything else. Finally, Miriam spoke. "Tell me about her." Elijah's hands tightened on the reins. "About who?" "Catherine." He didn't answer for a long moment. The wagon wheels creaked. Molly snorted. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. "She was kind," he said finally. "Kinder than anyone I've ever known. She used to bring food to the sick, even when her father told her not to. Said it was her Christian duty." He paused. "I think she actually believed that people were worth saving. And you?" "I believed in her." Miriam was quiet, absorbing this. "How did you meet?" "Church social. I was 19, she was 17. She walked up to me. This awkward, gangly kid who didn't know what to do with his hands. And she said, 'You look like you need a friend.' Just like that. No pretense. No games." He shook his head. "I'd never met anyone like her. What happened after she died?" "I stopped believing." The words came out flat, final, like a door closing on a room that would never be opened again. "In God. In everything." Miriam didn't push further. She just turned back to the horizon, her profile sharp against the bright sky. They traveled in silence for another hour. The homestead appeared gradually, rising out of the landscape like a ship emerging from fog. First the roof, then the walls, then the barn, the corral, the windmill spinning slowly in the dry wind. It was bigger than Miriam had expected. 2 stories, wooden construction weathered but solid. A porch that ran the length of the front with 2 rocking chairs that had clearly never been used. A garden that had gone to seed. A well with a hand pump. "It's beautiful," she said. Elijah looked at her, surprised. "Most people think it's lonely. Most people are afraid of quiet." She stepped down from the wagon, her boots raising small clouds of dust. "I'm not." They unloaded her things in silence. Elijah showed her to a room on the 2nd floor, the room that had been intended for Catherine all those years ago. It had a bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the plains. Clean but unlived in. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. "Thank you." He nodded once, then turned to leave. "Elijah." He stopped in the doorway. "I'm going to ask you something," Miriam said. "And I need you to tell me the truth." He waited. "When you asked for a wife, were you looking for a caretaker? Someone to nurse you through your dying days?" He turned to face her. "No." "Then what were you looking for?" He thought about the question. Really thought about it. And he realized that he didn't have a clear answer. He told himself he didn't want to die alone. But was that really it? Was that the whole truth? "I think," he said slowly, "I was looking for a reason not to be angry anymore." Miriam's expression softened. "Angry at what?" "Everything." He looked away. "God, the world, Catherine for dying, myself for surviving." He met her eyes again. "I've been angry for 12 years, Miriam. And I'm tired." 6 weeks passed. They fell into a rhythm, the 2 of them like 2 gears slowly learning to turn together. Miriam cooked. Elijah worked the land. They ate dinner together every evening, talking about small things, the weather, the cattle, the repairs that needed doing. Safe subjects. Easy subjects. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Elijah found himself watching her. The way she moved through the house, efficient but graceful. The way she hummed while she worked songs he didn't recognize. The way she sometimes stood at the window in the evening, staring out at the darkening plains, her face impossible to read. She never talked about her past, and he never asked, until the night the letter came. It arrived with the mail carrier, tucked between a catalog and a notice about taxes. A small envelope, cream-colored, addressed to Miriam Yates in handwriting that was elegant and distinctly feminine. No return address. Miriam's face went white when she saw it. She took the letter without a word, retreated to her room, and didn't come down for the rest of the evening. Elijah ate dinner alone that night, listening to the silence of the house, wondering what secret that envelope contained. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair loose around her shoulders instead of braided. A haunted look that reminded Elijah of his own reflection in the months after Catherine's death. "Miriam, I need to tell you something." She sat down at the table, and Elijah sat across from her. The morning light came through the window, painting everything in shades of gold. "My name isn't Miriam Yates," she said. "Not really. It's a name I chose for myself 3 years ago, when I left Boston." Elijah waited. "My real name is Mary Elizabeth Hammond." She swallowed. "And I killed my husband." The words hung in the air. "Not with a gun," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not with poison. Nothing so clean as that. I killed him with silence, with patience, with years of watching and waiting and planning." "What did he do to you?" "Everything." Her voice cracked. "He was a wealthy man, respected. Everyone thought he was wonderful. But behind closed doors," she shook her head, "he was a monster, cruel in ways I still can't put into words. He broke me, piece by piece, year by year, until there was nothing left." Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "One night, I watched him drink himself into unconsciousness. He fell asleep by the fireplace the way he always did, and I watched the candle beside him burn lower and lower until it fell onto his papers. I watched the fire spread. I watched it reach him." She met Elijah's eyes. "And I walked out the door." "Did he die?" "No. But he was burned badly enough that he'll never hurt anyone again. And I ran. Changed my name. Disappeared. Became Miriam Yates. Seamstress. Nobody from nowhere." She placed the letter on the table. "But someone found me. Someone from my old life. This letter is from his sister. She knows where I am. She knows what I did." Her voice trembled. "She's coming for me, Elijah. And when she gets here, she'll make sure I pay." Elijah looked at the letter, looked at Miriam, looked at the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion in her face, the weight of years of running finally catching up to her. And he made a decision. Let her come. Miriam blinked. "What?" "Let her come." He reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her since their wedding. "You're not running anymore, Miriam. This is your home now. And whatever comes through that door, we face it together." Her fingers tightened around his. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what she's capable of. I know that I've spent 12 years hiding from the world, and I know that I'm tired of being afraid." He stood up. "Whatever happened in your past, you survived it. You're still here. And that's all that matters to me." Miriam looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Disbelief? Hope? "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" And Elijah realized, in that moment, that somewhere along the way, between the silent dinners and the quiet mornings and the endless, ordinary days, something had changed. He wasn't just sharing his home with her anymore. He was sharing his heart. Eleanor Hammond arrived on a Tuesday. She came in a private coach, escorted by 2 men in dark suits who looked like they were used to handling unpleasant business. The coach stopped at the edge of Elijah's property, raising dust that hung in the still air like a warning. Elijah saw them from the porch. He'd been expecting this, had been preparing for it ever since the letter arrived. He wore his father's gun belt, hadn't worn it in years, but it fit like an old memory. Miriam stood inside the house, watching through the window, her face pale but determined. "Stay here," Elijah had told her. "No, Miriam. Whatever she has to say to me, I'll hear it face to face. I'm done hiding." So they waited, together. Eleanor stepped down from the coach. She was older than Miriam by perhaps 10 years, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe style and a face that might have been beautiful once, before bitterness had carved itself into every line. She wore black mourning clothes, Elijah realized, mourning for a brother who wasn't dead. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Mary." Her voice was cold as January wind. "You look, well, for a murderer." Miriam stepped out of the house, standing beside Elijah. "I'm not Mary anymore, Eleanor. I'm someone else now. A name doesn't change what you are." Eleanor's eyes flickered to Elijah. "And who is this? Your accomplice?" "My husband." Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Surprise? Disgust? How fitting. One monster finds another. Elijah stepped forward. "Mrs. Hammond, you've come a long way. Say what you came to say." Eleanor looked at him with open contempt. "My brother lies in a hospital bed, scarred beyond recognition. He will never walk again, never speak clearly again. And this woman," she pointed at Miriam, "is responsible." "Your brother," Miriam said quietly, "beat me every day for 6 years. He broke my arm twice, fractured my ribs so many times I've lost count. He told me if I ever tried to leave, he would kill me." Her voice grew stronger. "I didn't kill him, Eleanor, but I'm not sorry he's suffering. You'll hang for this." "No." Miriam shook her head. "I won't. There's no evidence. No witnesses. Nothing but your suspicion and your rage." Eleanor's face twisted. "You think that matters? You think I need a court to punish you? I have money, influence. I can make your life a living hell. You can try." Elijah's voice cut through the air like a blade. "But let me tell you something, Mrs. Hammond." He descended the porch steps slowly, stopping 3 feet from Eleanor. "I've spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of loss. Afraid of connection. Afraid of caring about anything. Because everything I've ever loved has been taken from me." He looked back at Miriam. "But I'm not afraid anymore. And I'm not going to let you take one more thing from someone I care about." Eleanor stared at him. "You'd protect her? Knowing what she's done. I know what she survived. And I know what your brother did to her. So yes, I'd protect her with my last breath." For a long moment no one moved. Then Eleanor laughed. A bitter, broken sound. "You're both mad." "Maybe," Elijah shrugged. "But we're alive. And we're together. And whatever happens next, we'll face it standing side by side." He gestured toward the road. "Go home, Mrs. Hammond. Go back to Boston. Take care of your brother. Live your life. But leave us alone." Eleanor looked between them, her mouth working like she wanted to say something else. But something in Elijah's eyes, or maybe something in Miriam's steady gaze, stopped her. Without another word, she turned. She climbed back into the coach. And she left. Elijah didn't die that year. Or the next. Doc Morrison couldn't explain it. The shadow on his lungs, the thing that had been killing him, had stopped growing. It hadn't disappeared, but it had frozen, suspended like winter ice that never quite melts. Some days he felt weak. Some days he coughed until his chest ached. But he kept going. He had a reason to. Miriam, he still called her that even after he learned her real name, changed the homestead. She planted flowers in the neglected garden, mended the curtains, brought life into rooms that had been empty too long. And slowly, piece by piece, she brought life back into Elijah himself. They never had a dramatic declaration of love. No passionate speeches. No grand gestures. But every evening, they sat on those porch chairs, the ones that had never been used, and watched the sun go down. They talked about small things. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They just sat, together, in the vast and endless quiet. One evening, as the sky turned from gold to purple, Miriam asked him a question. Do you still think about her? Catherine? Elijah was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted. But not the way I used to. I used to think about her with pain, with anger. Now I think about her with gratitude. For what she taught me, for who she helped me become. He looked at Miriam. She would have liked you. Miriam smiled. A rare, genuine smile that transformed her whole face. I hope so. They sat in silence as the stars appeared, one by one, scattered across the darkness like promises. Elijah. Thank you. For not making me run anymore. He reached over and took her hand. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. And there, on that porch, in the middle of nowhere, two broken people found something they'd both stopped believing in. Not a fairy tale. Not a perfect ending. Just peace. Just companionship. Just love, quiet and steady and real. The town of Hollow Ridge had laughed when Elijah Crane asked for a wife. But Elijah Crane had the last laugh after all. Because in the end, it wasn't about what you asked for. It was about being brave enough to ask.